Welcome to the Voices of the Collective. This is Kristina Scaglione, your host, and I have a really special guest today, Hayley Schapiro. Hayley, thank you for zooming in today from Florida.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
You're the founder of Curated Therapy Collective, which is what I wanted to showcase today. So, for people who don't know you yet, can you tell us a little bit about your background as a therapist and what led you to this field?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Hayley Schapiro. I have the privilege of having my own private practice within West Palm Beach, Florida. And I have been here for almost 10 years. And prior to that, I was practicing in New York. And
We miss
through
you.
I miss it too. Except today I don't really miss it as much though. Had to get my little weather plug in there, but get my New York fix as often as I can. But fortunately, I do have the privilege of not only having a private practice that supports children, adolescents, teens, and families. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist kind of by framework, but really do enjoy family systems work and kind of the dynamics that present with working with families. And that's always fun and engaging and challenging in its own right. But through my clinical work, I definitely identified pretty quickly that there were two, I would say, persistent concerns that continued to arise. One of which was professional to professional support. So clinicians entering private practice and kind of underestimating the impact of privately practicing. And then the second was how we as people seek out mental health support. And what I mean by that is what kind of systems exist for us to be able to find the right fit. And when these two kind of themes really just became undeniable, I felt empowered and encouraged to seek out solution because that's just kind of how I'm wired.
Uh-huh.
But I had the opportunity to be connected with so many incredible people and colleagues within the US and really just being able to learn from each other and grow and be supportive of the other. So I'm happy to just shed light on what we've been doing and how we've been doing it.
That's awesome. What led you to the field as a therapist?
I come from a very long line of educators, and my mother was a reading specialist and a teacher before her. My grandmother, an educator, had some nurses, sprinkled in there, super powerful, brilliant women. And I knew that I definitely wanted to be a helper, but ultimately didn't know really what that meant. You don't
Right.
see in kindergarten classes us going around the room and asking what you want to be when you grow up. It's not often that someone says, I want to be a social worker after the person before her wanted to be a baseball player and the person before him wanted to be a fireman. So I think it took a little while for me to figure out what that helper meant and looked like. And I knew kind of the beauty of being in education, but also the challenges that come with being in the classroom just because of family experience.
Mhm.
So I think I kind of landed on therapeutic support, private practice, psychology, and kind of cycled through different fields and disciplines. And I would say the light bulb moment was I had the privilege very early in my college career to work at a summer camp for children with complex medical needs. And on the interdisciplinary team,
Okay.
was located in Pennsylvania. I was connected through another volunteer opportunity that I had. And on that interdisciplinary team was a clinician, was a licensed clinical social worker that was really acting as the liaison between camper and family, being away from home for the first time. So think
Yeah.
like Ronald McDonald's light in design, just because that was, what existed. But it was just such a poignant and meaningful experience that I think that's what gave me a name, for what I was looking for. And guess you could say the rest is history.
When you first became a clinician, what did you imagine your career would look like especially after you identified what it felt like to be in that camp and you had a name for it? What did you imagine you could do with it?
Make everyone feel better.
I mean, that might be as simple as that.
Improve the quality of life. I remember having a very naive experience in my maybe first year clinical placement, and I worked in a charter school in East Harlem, and the socioeconomic group that supported this school was vast. And working there, I remember being in a scenario where there were a lot of tears of young children, and my response was, I'm gonna take you to Toys R Us, and I'm gonna get you a cupcake, and I'm gonna, everything's gonna be better, and we're all just gonna be happy and smile again. And I laugh at that thought process, but I think early in your career, that's a very justified and understandable remedy.
Yeah. Who doesn't want a cupcake?
Right, I mean, especially if you're a first grader and you had, a disagreement with a classmate, what else would, bring a smile to one's face? I learned very quickly that there's far more complexity, but there was also beauty in being a little bit naive too, because it made me, I believe, approachable by this new group of people that I like to say that I eventually endeared myself to, and vice versa. But it was really those early experiences, I think, that informed my practice to this day.
Yeah, that's awesome. At what point in your clinical work did you start to notice something in the system wasn't working for people seeking therapy?
Yeah, I think have been a couple of data points along the way, as I said, but when they really became undeniable was when the verbiage of therapy just isn't for me became so unbelievably pervasive. And I remember thinking and sitting with colleagues at that time, and I seem to have always found myself in interdisciplinary environments. And what I mean by that was schools or hospital based settings or even within private practice. I mean, even if we have the same licensure, our modality may look different, or how we approach kind of conflicts or dilemmas looks really different. So I really mean interdisciplinary in all ways that the words are defined. But when that became such common verbiage, I really felt like I had to almost provide a little bit of psychoeducation
Yeah.
around, I understand why you feel that way, that therapy is not for you. But I'm not sure that the experience of really grappling with your deficits or trying to break habits or talking about difficult subjects or grief, like, I don't really think anyone feels that that experience is always fun,
Yeah.
or enjoyable. I mean, it's emotionally charged and complex, and I understand why you feel like it's not for you, but just because it's not necessarily for you doesn't mean that it's not something that we should, you know, still encourage ourselves to do or learn from or grow from. I mean, we should do hard things too, and we need to continue to challenge ourselves. But I don't know, I get on my soapbox about that particular verbiage because, I mean, unfortunately, it's not always so fun being in a
Right.
therapeutic environment.
Yeah. Well, there's that verbiage, right? And then there's the other one that we always hear, which is, I want therapy, but I don't know where to start. So, what were you seeing that made you realize that that is a real major barrier for people?
That was a perfect segue. It's like we planned that.
Do we do this for a
I
living?
mean,
Oh my
I
God.
think so. I think so. We go way back, so that's
I
why.
know.
I
That's
think
exactly why.
so. I definitely think that once I kind of brought my trusted colleagues around the table, I keep referencing this group because it's something that I hold so dear. Right? Your professional village, your colleagues, the people that you navigate tricky scenarios with. And I think when we kind of compared all of our notes, right, as to either inappropriate referral or, calling prospective clients back on the phone, I think what we realized was what was broken was not necessarily the therapeutic experience,
Hmm.
even though it was unpleasant at times.
Right.
Ultimately was flawed was the way in which we've basically designed finding therapeutic support.
Right.
And the platforms that existed, I think have their rigidities and check boxes, and they're led by algorithm. And I think
Hmm.
what you and I really bonded over, Christina, when we first met was this world of mental health is anything but black and white and
Yeah.
anything but rigid.
Of
So
course.
how can we possibly, you know, seek out support by using a form that is rigid and that is black and white. And we're pushing clients towards self-diagnosis. We're pushing clients towards, a WebMD history or a AI-informed decision.
I'm cringing.
We know how tragic that can look,
Yeah.
but also how misguided it can be because this world is not designed that way, the arena of mental health.
What was the moment when the idea for the Curated Therapy Collective, when did that actually click for you?
Sure. I remember thinking about um the magic wand question, right?
I love that question.
It's a classic, in one's toolkit. I was almost perhaps this day I had received yet another inappropriate referral. And what I mean by that is someone asking for help, and maybe they found me through a search engine, a directory, maybe they found me through their neighbor. It could have been either of the two, but
Right.
someone was calling and requesting support, and it really fell outside of my skill set and my expertise and, fee structure and all of the logistics that exist. And I was like, if I could come up with something better, if I had the ability to design my own process, how would I want someone to be able to find me? And I think what I arrived at very quickly was that I would love to talk to a person. I would love to talk to an informed party because, again, when we're talking about mental health, and unfortunately, I feel like this comes up so much, it's almost like a cliche. Like, you're not always going to go to your sister in law and say, like, I'm really struggling in my marriage. Who do you guys see for couples therapy?
Yeah, that would be
That's
awkward.
not, yeah, it's just, or my child is really exhibiting problematic behaviors. You're not going to go to your girlfriend from, the parents association and ask for a recommendation from her, because you're new to the community and you don't want to create some sort of, reputation associated with
Right.
problematic behavior. So again, that kind of lands us in a place where we need to search on our own.
And what's the problem with that?
How can we expect someone to ask for what they don't know? How can we expect someone to seek out a therapeutic modality where they don't speak the language? You're totally lost, in a sea of alphabet soup or of jargon, right?
Mhm.
That needs to be demystified. But the way in which directories exist, we're not doing much demystifying at all.
Right. And your model emphasizes clinician-guided matching, a process that's the process in place of algorithms, and why was that important to you?
Because I wanted an informed recommendation. And who else would be able to inform processes or procedures than those that actively do it every day?
Totally.
On my team, it is myself and three other clinicians, actively practicing clinicians, that field and navigate inquiry and curated connection. And the reason why we have kind of coined the term a curated connection is because even though clinicians are having the conversation, we are not doing technically clinical work, right? We
Right.
are not providing crisis intervention. We are not providing, you know, strategy and goal setting. We are simply having a more informed conversation than you kind of Googling in tandem to navigating some sort of, search engine site.
And many clinicians, they have ideas but never act on them. What gave you the confidence to actually build something?
I'd say frustration
Anger is a really good motivator.
is a great motivator. I have always erred on the side of transparency in building anything, whether it was a
Right.
practice, whether it was a particular project. And I think that this may tell you a lot about who I am, but, I just became particularly frustrated and ethically compromised, by
Mhm.
using these platforms that existed because I felt like who were they serving other than those that were, I don't know, financially behind them? Because it wasn't serving the clinician because of how saturated
Oh,
platforms have
totally.
become. There is no vetting. There is no true criteria. It's almost like sign here, pay here. And then the
Yeah.
second piece to it is certainly not serving the client because the barrier for entry is just getting higher and higher. I would also say that going back to your point of not knowing where to look or not knowing who to look for is sometimes you're looking for someone that kind of speaks your language. And I guess what I mean by that is I had a concierge match today and they had said something along the lines of, I'm Italian. And I I giggle about that, but kind of what she meant, but
I know exactly what she means.
I was just gonna say, I probably should have, brought you in as my phone a friend, but, I I have to say that how do you capture that in an algorithm? It's like
100%. How do you? Exactly. You can't. You can't capture that in an algorithm. And a lot is lost when you're just sifting through what has become our yellow book, right? It's an online yellow book of faces and names and numbers. And, every platform or directory kind of looks the same now when it comes to how to sift through for, zip code, price, availability. And then again, there's that section that they provide the section for modality, but you have to be informed in what you're looking for.
right,
So, yeah, it's a
use
good
that.
point.
And I would also say, something that go back to the sister-in-law example, something that worked for Susie, might not work for Tina and
Yeah.
their sisters. The point also goes back to the nuance and the personalized journey, that a person needs to go on during their therapeutic experience. For Tina, cognitive behavioral therapy might have been life-altering, but,
Right.
you know, from what her sister is grappling with, unfortunately, she just may not be ready for such a short-term intervention. So it's too personalized for you to really take recommendation or word of mouth in a vacuum. It really is. And not to say that a 15-minute conversation with a clinician is going to kind of remedy every aspect of this, but I think what we are able to pick up on is perhaps understand what it means when she was looking for someone that was Italian, or be able to ask a clarifying question. Like, can you describe to me what you mean by that?
Right.
Can you describe to me what you would be looking for? Is it tone of voice? Is it cultural references? Is it, Sunday sauce? Whatever, whatever. Yeah, I'm falling a little bit into stereotypes, but we had a giggle and it was a very humanizing conversation, which you don't have when you're putting your zip code in and determining your threshold of mileage from your house.
What were some of the early obstacles that you ran into launching CCC?
Think to be first and foremost, my ability to be able to take something that was an intellectual concept and implement it, non-clinicians, in trying to explain and articulate to my counterparts in IT and software. Because I think if you boil it down, the way that you communicate the framework or the idea behind the collective is, yes, we're clinicians that have the ability and the interest and the priority to collaborate, but the way in which we do that is through technology.
Mhm.
So that was probably the first stumbling block to success, which we, still refine and tweak. So that was first and foremost just the technology components. And then the second was really helping identify and support and educate our client cohorts, because it wasn't so much like, hey, we're over here, like we can do this for you, like big, shiny in light, even though that would probably, get a lot of attention. But again, because of the subtlety or stigma or kind of complexity of the space, meaning mental health, we really relied a lot upon our referral sources. So who I'm talking about are the internist, the medical practices, the legal consortiums that are professional organizations that support people that are navigating, tricky windows. We've worked very closely with surrogacy agencies, a lot of partners with family offices or concierge practices, people that, are able to make an educated an informed referral so that those connections can happen and that people feel confident, following through with those connections.
That's wonderful. I love that. As a female clinician, building something entrepreneurial, what have you learned about leadership along the way?
I think something that I've learned is that understanding what you do well and
Mm,
where you need support and assistance. Because by operating under the belief that this being your vision and having the inability to effectively delegate or ask for perspective or receive feedback, I feel like sometimes when you're talking to other entrepreneurs, it's like having another child, right? It's like
yeah.
your baby. And I think what I can say is that by being open to dialogue and understanding where your strengths are and where your deficits are, that is the best learning experience that you can have as a professional and as an entrepreneur for sure.
That's a great answer. This kind of segues into another section that we've sort of already talked about in other conversations that you and I have had, but many therapists struggle with the idea of being both a clinician and a business owner.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that?
Gotta take a sip before this.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I had shared a story with you, and I think it lit a little bit of a fire under both of us because you know what story I'm going to tell. I know. I had a mentor who I respect immensely. And again, understanding what your expertise is and what your skill set is. And they have built, their own version of their diversified practice and are extremely successful. And I had shared the framework of CTC and my practice and how they would work together. And you're nodding your head.
I am nodding it because I just mentioned this in a podcast that's getting released on the 20th. I give a shout out to you during that back and forth I had with Julie about this story because I have one very similar.
Well, that's why I think we're both in the seats that we are. Let's just put it that way, because there's nothing more empowering. So this mentor, I can't wait to hear that podcast. This mentor had shared with me that if I was going to move forward with CTC and the vision that I had, then I wouldn't be able to continue seeing patients. It just wouldn't be possible. I don't know how you could do that. And in my mind, I was like, I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
Because I think at the heart of so much of what I do and the conversations that I have, why I have trust and rapport and camaraderie with my community is because I am actively living the pain points and have lived the pain points that they are navigating.
Hmm.
Because I am a clinician, because I continue to practice, I was not ready, willing, or even able to give that up because of how important that work is for me. And again, I think you and I have talked about this at length. It's having the boundaries around my responsibilities to, all parties and groups, knowing what my strengths are and where my deficits are. So can I say that things have remained absolutely identical? Certainly not, but
Right.
I can brag about the fact that I have not found it absolutely impossible, to continue to practice as a clinician in private practice and build something that is so important, like the Curated Therapy Collective.
I hear a little voice that says, challenge accepted.
I'm sad. You're so right. Well, like I said, I'll show you.
That's perfect.
But I just feel like, not to have a whole girl power moment, but I do want to say that we wear so many hats,
Hmm.
whether it's nurturer, whether it's caregiver, friend, auntie, cousin, granddaughter. I mean, all of the titles, professional,
Hmm.
entrepreneur, spouse. And I think that to have the ability to do that to the best of your ability is something that I do not downplay for 1 minute. It's certainly not without intentionality or tricky days sometimes, but I was happy to take on that challenge because I wasn't willing to forego either aspect.
And I'm so grateful that you didn't.
Thanks. Me
You're
too.
welcome. So, one thing we talk about in our ecosystem is that collaboration expands opportunities rather than limiting them. How have you seen collaboration play a role in your work?
Oh, this is so good. Okay. So
I told you this was going to be fun.
I know. I knew it. I know it. I mean, from the moment we were on screen, can you believe that we've never been in the same room? How weird is that?
What? We've known each other a long time.
And we grew up together.
Yeah.
So my collaboration, I think, is opportunities to grow, opportunities to be challenged respectfully, opportunities to learn and try things out.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record on this topic, but it just applies. Again, it's the diversified skill sets. I think working in schools, working in hospitals, working for large nonprofits, I learned and improved my clinical skills, not only with my clients, but with my colleagues,
Right.
because I needed to learn how to respectfully advocate for my patients. I needed to learn how to ask questions that would really elicit the responses that I was really looking for. We hear a lot about white coat syndrome, right? When you
Mhm.
work in an interdisciplinary environment and doctors and other specialists have different skill sets and priorities, and you need to learn how to work collaboratively.
Right.
And I think it's so unfortunate when I hear from clinicians that I speak to daily that reference communities of clinicians now feel in competition with one another
Yeah.
rather than leading collaboratively. And that is so devastating to me because this work is so difficult, and to do it solo again is just doesn't yield the best result for any participant.
You're right. And this next question, I think you pretty much answered it, but I'll ask it anyway. If you look at the therapy landscape today, what do you think needs to change the most? And I think you just said it. Working in silos needs to change.
Because and I think it goes back to the difficulty of the work, but also how do you make this work sustainable? This I say with immense pride that I've been a clinician for almost 15 years, but I have always been, I'd say, direct practice adjacent. There are periods where I managed programs or wrote grants or had shorter term caseloads, but I don't think every clinician can say that they've had that kind of trajectory. And I attribute that to my colleagues, and I have always prioritized that collaborative relationship because it improves, honestly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I thoroughly agree with that.
Yeah. Have you seen in your interdisciplinary environment similar benefits? Because I
Oh,
feel
yeah.
like while all our yours is certainly a wider spectrum of discipline. Is there ever a time where you've had to like regroup and revisit? I would be interested how you've kind of reconciled those different points of view.
Would say, in short, I haven't had to regroup the idea so much as I've had to regroup the members. I think some people hear the word collaborative and they think this is a great place for me to take. So I've had issues with members that only came in here for themselves and to benefit their own practices instead of collaborate, which is the antithesis of the name that we have. It's
Right.
like you couldn't get any further from what we're working on here to this is actually what the episode's about. So the one that's coming out on Friday, guys.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a teaser for a different podcast named License to Spill, which I said I'm also gonna have you on that show because there are certain aspects to our business that people don't discuss that is maybe sometimes the undercurrent that is in the mix of us trying to grow and help the masses. There's always gonna be a couple of outliers who wanna undermine that, and I said to myself in this recent regrouping is to really I wanna be able to refer to somebody that I can trust personally when I was getting negative feedback from newer members that I didn't know personally, but had come in the last, let's say, 12 months and then have since exited.
Mm.
It has made me change my screening process for who is allowed to join because now I don't ever want to have an experience where I have to backpedal and explain why someone had a not great experience. Again, it's multidisciplinary. It's outside my scope of practice, so I don't always have a gauge on what is appropriate for that particular
You don't
field.
know what you don't know, right? We were
Correct.
talking about that all the time, and having an understanding of that, informs so much of what you're doing. So
Right. So
I
the organization aspect of it has changed. The vetting process has changed. And now what I've noticed is necessary is education. I'm doing a lot more education around what the purpose of our collective is and how you can benefit as a client and as a clinician. And then there's two different scopes in which you could benefit from, two different levels of education that are necessary for people to understand. It's changed kind of what I'm speaking about. It's changed how I'm promoting the business. It's changed a lot in that sense. To answer
love
your question, that
that.
was like a little
Yeah.
long-winded, but
No, I think it informs all processes. And I think we just did in real time a collaborative, exercise because I feel sometimes when I'm speaking to clinicians that are interested in joining Curated, I feel like I spend a lot of time almost telling them what we are not,
mm,
because it's almost like I need to
cancel out what they're thinking.
essentially and
Yeah,
almost like make an educated
I did the same
assumption
thing.
around, this is what not to expect. And then we can kind of
I
backtrack
totally get
into
it.
what we are.
Yeah.
But it seems to be the most effective strategy because, of course, people are trying to make an informed decision, which I respect immensely. But
Mhm.
sometimes I have to kind of be direct in that,
100%.
I want to make sure that you feel confident in your decision. And I think we do that a little bit with our clients too.
Yeah, definitely. I've had to put some marketing material out there to explain that I'm not a networking group because it's just hard sometimes for people to understand based on the name what we do. It's similar to you. I've had to change that. How do services like the CTC help make therapy more approachable for people? So for the clients.
Yeah. I think sometimes we find ourselves connected with people that have not pursued a therapeutic relationship before. Maybe they haven't found it necessary and it's now, or maybe they've just been avoidant or kind of started the process and then not pursued it. So I think there's a little bit of education that needs to happen with our clients as to what their expectations can be. And it's nice because we have the ability to speak at CTC really high level, right? Because we're not talking about our own practices. We're almost talking about like the library or the range or
Mhm.
spectrum. You can meet with someone in a hybrid environment, meaning you
Right.
can go to the office semi routinely and then check in every other appointment via phone. If you're prioritizing an in-person experience versus you're someone that travels a lot for work, maybe a virtual experience would be a lot different. We're
Yeah,
also able to do a lot of education about different modalities
that's great.
during that time. So, and of course, we talk about kind of the logistics like, oh, this person doesn't, see people on the weekends. Oh, this person, doesn't practice X, Y, and Z. And this is all information that we get from our clinicians when they're entering the process. This person works with people over the age of 18, whatever it is. So, there's definitely the ability to ask all of the questions that maybe someone would be a little bit more bashful asking the person that they're working with, especially early on, because they don't want to seem unprepared or however they may feel about the experience. So that's definitely the kind of first benefit to the client. Also, if I could share a little story, I feel like
Yeah.
it just illustrates this so beautifully. We had a call. This was really early collective days, but it's one of my favorite kind of illustrations of what we're able to do. And it's a parent who is calling on behalf of their freshman in college.
Okay.
And he was really freshman was having a very difficult transition, in a new
Into college.
in an environment, in a new school. This was November, and he had started as a freshman in August. So,
Okay.
the parent had given it a little bit of time, but she had gotten, enough panicked phone calls and she had jumped on a plane, a couple of times. And, it was not sustainable, the strategies that they had in place, for the first couple months in school. And as you could imagine, mom resided in Illinois and son was going to school in another state. And we couldn't continue to jump on a plane.
Right.
There needed to be some more infrastructure and support in place. And they had encouraged, health services and sort of the guidance center on campus. And it had helped, but mom had kind of come to terms with the fact that she needed just more direction. And what's amazing is that a clinician within our collective was actually the person that brought mom to us. She had said, I don't really have contacts where your son is in college, but I think I know someone that would. So that was really just a beautiful story, but also not only were we able to get son connected to supports where he was away at school, but in that same conversation, my colleague that was navigating this concierge connection had made a very innocent inquiry, but a clinically informed one, asking mom if she could benefit from some support.
That's a
And,
great question.
you know, I think there are some people that would maybe argue that that was not the basis. But again, we're making recommendations. These are not, clinical goals that are being established. And as a result, we were able to get not only son connected, but mom connected to kind of develop some more coping skills around her emptiness and,
Mhm.
feelings of helplessness around being far from her baby.
Yeah.
So, how does an algorithm do that?
Can't. It can't.
Not that well.
No, it can't. Where do you see CTC going in the next few years?
I would love to continue to give attention and direction to community of clinicians. I don't think this work, as I said, it's already pretty difficult, and I don't think it's going to find simplicity anytime soon, just with the ways of the world today. And I
Mhm.
think that we need now more than ever to offer support and forums for clinicians to convene. You know, you and I have discussed like gone are the days of conference culture. Within CTC, we have the opportunity to convene around professional roundtables, which, I love having Kristina with us because she just brings such an energy and a skill set.
I
But
bring the comedy, guys. I bring
listen,
the comedy.
it's a beautiful thing. But I received an email, Christina, from a clinician that attended our professional roundtable in January. And he had written me an email and said, thank you so much for providing the forum. I haven't had a conversation like that since graduate school.
Wow. Wow. And how many years was that?
20 plus.
Jeez. Jeez.
But I mean,
But unless you're seeking it on purpose, right? Unless you're seeking it on purpose and either you're developing a group that you do peer-to-peer supervision or you're paying for supervision so that you can have a pulse on
of
on
course.
some type of dialogue, you're not going to find this in your everyday happenings
No.
because
And
you're clocking into your own office, right, by
yeah, of
yourself, and then you're going
course.
home, which is oftentimes in the same space.
Yeah,
So,
and now supervision has become quarterly, has become
mm,
monthly. It's not that steady intellectual curiosity that I feel like it can be or it once was or
right.
what you hope for, right? So I just feel like the fact that we can make it a opportunity and provide forum, I think it just also makes some clinicians' worlds so much bigger. Going back to that kind of competition collaboration, I mean, we have clinicians that have co-authored articles, something like this, where we appear on the other's podcast or,
Right.
in consulting on a client, if you have someone
Which
that
is also fun. I don't think people realize how much fun it is.
it's so refreshing. I had a conversation truly before I got on this podcast with you, Christina, and it was I keep hitting this wall. Conversation keeps ending here. And, on Zoom, I'm like bringing out all my tips and tricks and she's like, brilliant. It's just like the fresh set of eyes, the forums, the opportunity to collaborate. I just feel like it helps us work muscles that if you're not actively working them, they're not being used.
Mhm.
And even if you're in a group practice, and I feel like I say this in the most thoughtful way, but when you're in a group practice, and regardless of your size, whether you're 50 or whether you're 3, you kind of start to feel a little bit like brothers and sisters after a while,
Right.
you know,
Right.
where
Yeah.
you continue to go to each other for supervision or collaboration. And you kind of can finish each other's sentences after, a period of time of working together, and not to knock group practice because I think that's such a valuable tool and environment. But it's sometimes kind of nice to get an idea from someone who's not feeling like your brother and sister.
Yeah.
And that's also a super important aspect to what we're doing and what we're growing. So we are nearing 120 on platform and becoming more and more intentional in who we're seeking. And it's just been so exciting to kind of take an idea that was, my magical thinking question and seeing it happen in real time.
As someone building Limitless and someone building CTC, it's interesting to me how both models came from noticing gaps in the system.
Yeah. I mean, when they become so undeniable, I think something has to be done in that we should respond and approach it from an empowering place. We could continue to sit around the table and gripe, about observable flaws, but I knew that there was something that could be different and could be better. So I just was going to figure it out.
Absolutely. And I can totally respect that. What is something about you that most people don't know outside of your professional life?
Something that most people don't know about me.
That's true.
I'm a diehard New York Knicks fan,
Okay. Well, there's something.
especially living in Florida. You gotta rep your home team. I think it was kind of reinforced by my son who also is a big basketball fanatic, and I think he's kind of fed this interest. Where I think it kind of comes from is that, when I was younger, and still lived in New York, but still lived at home with mom and dad and my sister, we would create family core memories around, sports and participation and camaraderie and rah-rah. And, that was a big core memory within my home life. So some of that is translating in that way and bringing that from my family of origin to my family uh, today. But I think, I watched last night. We won. It was big games.
It is funny to me to picture you in West Palm with a Knicks hat on.
I have photo proof. We all find each other too. It's like anyone else that, lived in New York at some time. The numbers are favorable. But
That's really funny. It's good information. I might even Photoshop that into this podcast. Okay. If a therapist listening to this show today has an idea for something bigger, a platform, a program, a collective, what advice would you give them?
don't be afraid to enter into conversation or skill set that you don't currently possess, because you have the ability to learn and grow and self-educate. And there's nothing more empowering and motivating than having an idea and running with it.
I love that. Someone listening today has been thinking about starting therapy, but feels overwhelmed by the process. What would you want them to know?
I would hope that they would now have a first step of connecting with Curated Therapy Collective and have a conversation. There's little downside to educating yourself and having a conversation with someone that is an informed party in kind of a very non-committal, low-hanging fruit sort of way.
I like it. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you giving me all of this time. I look forward to having you on again.
Thank you so much. I loved it. We can speak for days, so
I hope you had fun. It was
the
fun for
best.
me.
It was the best. Thank you so much.
I'm going to include all the information if there is a therapist listening or if there is a person that is thinking about therapy or isn't sure where to start. I will include all of Hayley Schapiro's information, all of the collective's information on how to get started, where to find her. It'll all be in the show notes, and I'll also include some links. And then let's see where that goes for everybody.
Amazing. I'm grateful for you, Kristina. Thank you for your
I'm grateful for you too. I'm so glad I'm part of your community.